Are you overwhelmed by the challenge of personalizing communication for thousands of students? That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. From nudging prospective students to guiding those already on their journey, AI assistants don't just automate, they write, build, and optimize every step of your digital campaigns. Discover how at element451.com/AI team.
Welcome to Visionary Voices, the College President's Playbook, a podcast that serves as your backstage pass to an uplifting and positive view into the collaborative playbook of higher education presidents and their senior leaders. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Gross. Join me weekly for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education leadership, from presidents to provosts, enrollment managers to CFOs, CIOs to chief diversity officers. This show is your ticket to the most future-forward strategies that are impacting real results on college campuses today. Each week, I will be posting highlights and insights from our show, so let's connect. Visionary Voices is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to have you here for this episode. Last December, I remember listening to Jeff Salingo's Future You podcast and remembered how impressed I was hearing about Reach University. And I have with me today two really special guests. We have Joe Ross, president of Reach University, and Eric Dunkler, chief executive and co-founder of the National Center for the Apprenticeship Degree at Reach University. Joe, Eric, thank you so much for being here today.
Bryan, thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us, Bryan.
Well, I'd love to dive in. I think our audience is going to be incredibly inspired by hearing everything that's happening at Reach University. Can you give our listeners a brief history of Reach University and its mission to provide alternative, accessible pathways to higher education?
Sure. Reach goes back to 2006 in Oakland, California, when it launched as a graduate institute for teachers. In 2020, fast forward to that time during COVID, that institute merged with an undergraduate apprenticeship startup called Oxford Teachers Academy. And with that combination of forces in fall 2020, Reach University was born. We started with 67 undergraduate candidates that fall. 4 years later, we have over 2,100. And Reach is now becoming known as the accredited nonprofit institution that is dedicated to bringing higher education into the workplace and to, as we say, turning jobs into degrees instead of the other way around. And we call that the apprenticeship degree.
This is amazing. I want to dive in with that with you, Eric. So many institutions are talking about the non-traditional students, and we know a lot of them are attempting to do things in a unique way. But Reach University really is unique with its apprenticeship model. So, Eric, can you explain to me a little bit about how this model works and how it might differ from traditional higher education pathways?
Absolutely, yeah. So Joe made a really good point. Because Reach has been so successful, they have so much inbound from other universities and state systems and industry partners. Like, how do we create this in our university? How do we create this earn and learn model in my industry? How do we create better state policy to incentivize this type of behavior? So it starts with the employer, right? So as opposed to the college starting with the classroom, it starts with an employer. So the workplace becomes the campus. Then it starts with a good instruction provider. So what Reach does is they work with districts and they help take paraprofessionals to licensed teachers through really innovative program design. So it takes an employer and a solid instructional provider to co-create an apprenticeship degree pathway. And then typically there's an intermediary or a sponsor involved that helps coordinate the funding, recruit the students to make sure that these pathways for incumbent workers are attainable and create new jobs for people in these communities, and they have no debt, and now they have upward economic mobility through new jobs.
I think it's important to emphasize that the apprenticeship degree is a quote unquote real degree. We get asked that a lot. Yes. BA does not stand for bachelor's apprenticeship. It stands for Bachelor of Arts, and it brings that combination of lifelong skills and job skills that we expect from higher education. What sets the apprenticeship degree apart arises, I think, from the centuries-old tradition of apprenticeship. And there are three things that must be true for something to be an apprenticeship, and they apply here. And we refer to them as the ABCs of apprenticeship degrees. A stands for affordability. You know, like in the history of the planet Earth, I don't think apprentices have been asked to go into student debt. They've been asked to give their sweat, and they get a paid job. And at Reach, what that means is that no one pays out of pocket after aid, non-debt aid, and scholarships. No one pays more than $75 a month for full-time enrollment. For us, that's what affordability means. B stands for, as Eric said, based in the workplace from day one, typically to the day of graduation, or at least for 70% of the program, the job comes first. One thing that's different is that with an apprenticeship degree, employers do not come to the university asking for its graduates. They come to the university bringing the students who they want to see upskilled and to have the opportunity to turn the job they have into a degree. And C stands for credit for learning at work. And that has a double meaning very intentionally. Learning at work does mean learning put to work, like theory put to practice. And it also literally means learning at work, where the workplace becomes the campus. And I think across the world where there are apprenticeship degree models, at least 50% of the credit hours typically arise from things happening in the workplace, whether it's formal training or work activities or other things that are awarded and embraced as credit worthy.
I think our listeners, there's so much to digest here. And we have college presidents, we have provosts, other senior leaders listening to us. And I bet you they're taking copious notes trying to figure this out. So this is a regionally accredited, this is a Bachelor of Arts degree. You're filling a need. I'm hearing mostly in rural areas, and you're working in particular areas where the organization identifies people who are already employed and need to be upskilled. This might sound like a lot for people at other college and universities who might be listening and thinking, can we possibly do something like this? How can Reach make this happen? How does Reach coordinate all these individual pieces to make a successful program like this?
Yeah, well, one thing to note is that there are some sectors where the workforce shortages are like storms of the century. And so the employers have changed their mindset. And I think universities, when they encountered that, are sometimes surprised. They're not looking for graduates. They're looking for their incumbent workforce to have jobs that are irresistible. And what makes a job irresistible is not just earning, but learning. The school example, I think, is across the country. There are schools all over the place. Wherever you are as a university president, you've got a local school system. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are 1.3 million classroom aides in this country, and we think there's 200,000 vacancies for teachers. So what you have is 3 to 4 times as many people working in schools without a bachelor's degree than there are vacancies for teachers. So if you can turn that workforce into degree holders, you can solve the labor shortage. What does that mean for a university? It means to encounter the local employers with a different proposition. And if you choose a field like teaching, and there's similar vacancies and dynamics in allied health, it gets off the ground fairly quickly.
And Bryan, there are 40 million plus Americans with some college and no degree, yet we're in an era of flat or declining enrollment in higher education. So from an enrollment imperative and a relevancy imperative, we believe college presidents and boards should be paying attention to this model.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. As an enrollment manager myself, about to go to NACAC, I can't tell you how many fellow VPs of enrollment management will be talking about, how do we tap into this?
So let's talk about enrollment management, right? So enrollment management changes completely in an apprenticeship degree model because it's all about employer partnership development. And it's not about marketing in the traditional sense. So many universities and colleges do more marketing than people realize. But with this model, you're really leveraging employer partners to do a lot of the stuff that typically universities did and that fell under the category marketing. We have found that our cost per enrollment as a result is dramatically lower than the industry standard. Typically, depending on the type of university, you're looking at $3,000 to enroll a student in a traditional program. If it's an expensive program, it might be $12,000. At Reach, we calculate that our cost to enroll fully loaded with all that partnership work is about $700 per enrollment. And that is because it's, to use business parlance, a B2B to C model where you go from business to consumer rather than direct to consumer, which is always much more expensive, even if you're a famous institution competing in a local market.
This is incredible. How do you align? I know Reach University, you have your own educational goals. You work with organizations, they have their educational goals. How do you align those to make sure that you're staying true to your values at Reach?
Yeah, we think that centering quality of a degree and making higher education still higher education is urgently important in this model. The reality is that people want not just a piece of paper and skills. They want to know that they can have the lifelong opportunity that higher education is supposed to present to you. And that kind of skill set depends not just on knowing how to do something, but being able to think critically about why it works, to be creative, to distinguish particulars from generalities, to be able to communicate. All these types of skills are what you get not just really quickly in a boot camp, you get them over time through a university education. That's the purpose of it. So I think every institution that does apprenticeship needs to think about how you're going to not engage in a compromise, just the way you don't want to engage in a compromise when you bring your programs online. Is it still higher education? Is there still regular and substantive interaction that you really believe in? Or is it basically a watered down correspondence course? At Reach, we've embraced the idea that technology really made possible during COVID of the synchronous online seminar. So we don't spend money on computer-aided instruction. We don't spend tremendous money on user interface design. None of our faculty needs to take their courses and put them through a review by someone who's an expert in that stuff, because they just turn on a Zoom room and have 20 to 30 candidates in a seminar. And we employ the tutorial method that some institutions in the United States have adopted and adapted from Oxford University. St. John's College, the Great Books College, employs a kind of learning through conversation. We do the same. Many other institutions have embraced that idea, but you can do that at line at scale, where your scale is not 1 to 1,000, but 1 to 20 times 100. And that's how we look to try to preserve what's special about higher education, is learning through discourse, conversation, and inquiry, and pairing that with embracing learning on the job that can also be very rigorous. And one other thing I'll mention, just as an example, you can take almost any topic that is taught in the most ivory tower of ivory towers and apply it to the workplace if you want to. If you want to teach project management, I like to say, often the whole point of project management is ownership of your project. Well, you could read just a few paragraphs from John Locke, who talks about property ownership is leading to greater productivity, and ask candidates to imagine, how does this apply in your workplace when it comes to project management? And you get some of the benefits, kind of the win-win of kind of both sides of the equation.
It's incredibly inspiring. And I think our viewers will really benefit from thinking about that, synchronized, model, of, getting students on with the faculty at the same time, keeping it simple and really tuning in so that you could grow at scale. We've talked about this conceptually. Talk to me about success stories on the ground. What are you actually seeing with the students? Do you have any stories that you want to share about how this is really impacting the lives of some of your students?
I want to emphasize that this is not just Reach University doing apprenticeship degree models. Eric comes from an incredible background with the community college system in Colorado with some incredible outcomes for students. So Eric, why don't you share some of the examples from Arapahoe Community College?
Awesome.
Sure. Yeah. So we had a 19-year-old underserved student from the local school district that was going to stay, that was place bound. He heard about our cybersecurity apprenticeship program with Lockheed Martin. He entered into our cybersecurity program. that first year, which is almost a pre-apprenticeship. He got the interview with Lockheed Martin his first semester, second year. They accepted him into their software development apprenticeship program. And then they gave him his clearance. They paid for his bachelor's completion. So he was a 19-year-old student from an underserved community that was going to stay that he was place bound because he had young kids. And he was able to get into a rewarding career with a major industry partner at the age of 19 because he partook in an apprenticeship degree program with our college. And what that meant was lifelong upward economic mobility. He's now about 23 years old, working full-time for Lockheed in a senior cybersecurity role. So that's one example of the power of an apprenticeship degree. He had no debt, again, full-time job with clearance, and now is going to create new economic opportunities for his own kids.
Great. I would love our viewers to dive a little deeper on this accessibility and affordability piece. So let's first talk about accessibility because it's already come up 3 or 4 times in the conversation. Reach University emphasizes accessibility for students from diverse backgrounds. So how do you go about achieving that, given what you've told us, when you focus on partnerships, when you focus on programs, how do you make sure that you're really accomplishing that emphasis on accessibility for diverse students?
Well, the candidate in an apprenticeship degree program is typically in some kind of frontline position. In a school, think paraeducator, classroom aide. Some of our candidates work in the lunchroom or in the office. We have a few bus drivers. We have a few janitors even. But they're in that workplace, in that environment that can be leveraged as a college campus. What we are finding is that whereas most school systems have this challenge where the demographics and the lived experience of the teachers is not a match with the students in the same school, but the paraeducators do reflect the local experience of the students in that school much, much more closely. In fact, many of them came from that same school system, maybe went to a community college for a couple of years and now are working where they grew up. So what we're finding is a very, very close match to the local community demographics and lived experience amongst apprenticeship degree candidates, more than you would find where a population might otherwise be recruited from some other place with some other background. Overall, as a result of that, our access reflects the demography of where we are. And so it varies. In Northwest Alabama, there's been a surge in the Hispanic population. Most of our candidates in rural Russellville, Alabama, and nearby places like Tharptown, most of them grew up speaking Spanish, and they reflect the lived experience of this growing Spanish community of students in those places. In other places, it reflects other local demographics. I think that's the interesting thing with an apprenticeship program. It's place-based, and so naturally has that effect. I think that the places where that is really a game changer for access are rural communities where there's this spirit of hope that young people will go to college, but this reality that if they do, they'll leave and maybe not come back. And so the employers in these rural communities, some of which are education deserts without even a community college in the county, for those employers, they really face no other choice than to think about how do we grow our own talent with the people who are here already committed to this community. And so an apprenticeship pathway to a degree really kind of more naturally leverages that kind of access and the things that arise from it.
I'm so interested. Who is the team at Reach University that decides the geography? How do you decide which communities to go into? Do you reach out to them? Do they reach out to you? A little bit of both?
Well, one of the unusual things about Reach is we started this model kind of like a startup 4 years ago, and a little bit of startup life, even as a nonprofit university, is it's better to be lucky than to be good sometimes. We ended up lucking into some places that really embraced the idea of being an early adopter of the model that we were offering. In Louisiana, there were some parishes in the rural parts of the state that when we visited them said, bring it. Same thing happened along the Arkansas Delta, along the sort of border of Arkansas and Tennessee. And part of the happenstance there was the co-founder who envisioned this undergraduate apprenticeship model, my co-conspirator in this work, Mallory Dwinell Palish. She had written her doctoral dissertation on rural teacher shortages in those places in the Delta. And so that relationship base kind of gave rise to where we started. From there, we have found that it's really useful to think about education deserts as a place to go, right? We like going places where there isn't a local community college or a four-year university because those places really embrace this model quickly. And we can do a lot of good in those types of places. And we found that because we started where we did, there are a lot of places in the American Southeast that are knocking on our door. So a lot of our expansion, even though we're based in Oakland, California, is centering around places like Alabama and Tennessee.
That's amazing. You talked earlier about the B to B to C, the business to business to consumer, and about your $700 per enrollment. A lot of the VPs of enrollment management would be salivating over that number, but how much money we spend in marketing. How do you maintain such a high quality education? You must still have expenses. How do you ensure that your annual revenues still exceed your annual expenses and still have such a big impact? Talk to me about the cost piece.
Yeah, so it's about revenue and cost. On the revenue side, we braid together funding that is non-debt to help pay our actual cost. Our actual cost varies, but it could be $5,000 to $7,000 per year for everything. That is put together by braiding Pell for those who are eligible, sometimes with philanthropy, very often now with workforce dollars from the Department of Labor, which has come into higher education recently by making teaching and the role of principal apprenticeable fields, and those fields require degrees. So that means the Department of Labor is now helping to fund higher education, and we're definitely focused on that in many places where we work. On the cost side, one of the things that truly helps us is we don't have any kind of religion around cost per credit that many large institutions have. So there's not kind of an obligation to sort of keep the costs per credit or our tuition per credit hour at some level. And that combined with the lack of we don't have physical infrastructure to keep going is part of it. Another part of it is embracing a faculty model where in the professions, many of the people working in the workplace have advanced degrees and even doctorates and are delighted to be professors of practice. And so a lot of our faculty are professors of practice. We don't refer to them as adjuncts unless they are truly an adjunct in the traditional sense and are working at lots of universities. That's only about 10% of our faculty population. The overwhelming majority of our faculty population are professors of practice, which you are named based on still practicing what you profess. That's a requirement to have that title. And with the seminar system that I described that's hosted by Zoom, we're able to really offer, I'll just say this. I know we offer top of the schedule, top of the kind of range compensation for professors of practice. And then they're able to come in and lead seminars. They're kind of job embedded like our candidates are. By day, they're working in the workplace. By evening, they're in class. So our professors and our candidates are experiencing that same life.
And Bryan, good point that Joe just made. So one of the number one things the National Center for the Apprenticeship Degree supports colleges with is called unit economics. Most colleges, Bryan, that you're familiar with, when they create a new degree program, they create it within the same cost structure, right? So it's the same tuition. Yep. What we help them do is create a parallel model with a different unit economic model to get those costs down. That is very difficult for a traditional university, but as they move into scale into this new world of apprenticeship degree, they have to look at unit economics differently and creating that parallel pathway, same quality degree, but different delivery with different costs is what they need to work towards. And that's something we help them with quite a bit.
That's amazing. It's a perfect segue. I'll ask both of you to get your crystal ball out a little bit. And as I mentioned, a lot of listeners are thinking, how could this apply to, my college or university? How do you see the role of apprenticeships evolving in the broader higher education landscape? Is this something that Reach University could advise or consult a more traditional university to employ or adopt themselves?
I have been saying lately that we may really be at a major transition point. It's always very popular to say that higher education is changing itself. Every 20 years, there's some new change for higher education. But I really do think that this is a really big change in terms of the way the players and the processes and the rails, so to speak, are set up. And one thing that I think is striking is that that type of really big change does happen to higher education from time to time. 300 years ago, Harvard was teaching Latin. 200 years ago, there were no state university land-grant systems. 100 years ago, well, heck, we didn't have the case study method in business schools yet. And I could talk about the Postal Service essentially being how we did correspondence education and distance education. I actually think this is a pretty big change. The good news is I think there's a lot of kind of a perfect storm of good news for colleges and universities to adopt apprenticeship and workplace-based models. And my prediction is they will, because of just the reality of the current market. There are 40 to 50 million working adults on one hand who say in survey after survey in the Chronicle of Higher Education that they wish they had a bachelor's degree but do not. Compare that to the 3 million who are graduating from high school every year. There's a much, much, much bigger opportunity to work to serve working adults and to think of working adults not as non-traditional, but as the new traditional college student. I think that's fine. I think it's great. It's a nice way of thinking about this fourth century of higher education in America that we're entering into. And at Reach, we really believe that our mission is only achieved if we can help others trying to do this work succeed. And so we talked about the ABCs. I'll add a D that we think about, which stands for degree model expansion. And the reason we created the National Center of the Apprenticeship Degree is to really bring together the higher education sector, at least those who are willing, to help set standards of practice together, to help set metrics of success and definitions. So together as a field, we can define what the apprenticeship degree means and bring American higher education into the workplace.
This is great. So inspiring, really amazing. We have all these young listeners out there, people who aspire to be presidents and provosts and VPs of enrollment management. They listen to the podcast, and I always like to ask our guests, what advice would you give to our listeners who aspire to be in your seat, Eric or Joe? How could they think about advancing in their profession in today's challenging world?
I think that what's become clear is that the pathway into the college presidency goes through many different doors. There are people who, like you, Bryan, are in enrollment management. There are others who come through academics. There are people who come out of the military. There are people who come out of business. There's a lot of different ways into the college presidency. But if you're in academia now, I think it's really important to become obsessively into the idea of how to do innovation in higher ed. Innovation is really, really hard for higher ed. And I think there's a rising tide of interest in proving that higher ed can innovate, but it's structurally hard, but it's possible. It's structurally hard in part because of the centuries-old tradition of management through committee that is not the way other innovative sectors operate. It is structurally hard because the complexities of accreditation and federal regulation. But it's also something that's possible to do. Reach University is by far not the only institution that's doing some groundbreaking things. So lots of folks say, learn how to understand a balance sheet. You can learn how to understand a balance sheet. I think it's a much more interesting and complex problem to figure out how to thread the needle of innovation in higher education. One book to read is by a college president who retired and then boldly wrote, whatever it is, I'm against it. That's an interesting place to start.
Well, and Bryan, let me go one step further, that we have measured higher education based on credential attainment for years. That's notable, but it's really about being obsessed with upward economic mobility for all students. That means not being drunk with student loan debt. That means creating really robust reciprocal partnerships with employer partners and working with policymakers to incentivize good behavior in terms of higher education, earn and learn programs towards of how industry is engaging with incumbent workforces. And so we do believe we're in this fourth century of higher education. It's really exciting. We want people, the young listeners, to know that it's okay to be a leader and question how higher education, while American higher education is exceptional, there's a lot of things we can do better, and to question that and lead with that.
I love it. Yeah. Question how we could do things better. Great advice. All right. We close out every episode. We have an ongoing Spotify playlist, and we ask our guests to add to our playlist. Pick a song, any song that exemplifies the spirit of Reach University or how you think about the collaborative nature at Reach University.
So my pick is going to be "Power to the People" by John Lennon. And first off, it's an awesome song with an awesome sound, and it's motivating and gets you out of bed. But second, power to the people is kind of what we're talking about. There are 50 million people, as I said earlier, without a degree but want one, who are in the workplace. They should be able to get it without leaving the community they call home. And I think the apprenticeship degree is about giving people the power of education, giving that to the people, giving power to the people at home.
I love it. Eric, you feel good about that song?
I feel great about that song. I'm not going to try to one-up that one.
All right. Well, we had Joe Ross, president of Reach University, Eric Dunkler, chief executive and co-founder of the National Center for Apprentice Degree at Reach University. And I thank you so very much. I think our audience is going to really enjoy hearing the story of Reach University and really all the amazing things that you're doing with the apprenticeship model. So thanks for being on today.
Visionary Voices, the College President's Playbook, is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admission professionals find their next big ideas and feature a huge selection of the industry's best. As your hosts, learn from Artis Cadu, Jamie Hunt, Allison Tercio, and so many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.